mean, when we spoke recently to set this up, you were concerned that you didn't want it to be like a podcast where people ask you the same dull. What's the most common question that you get asked that you think, oh, not again?
I mean, I love talking about different experiences that I've had and the journey that I've been on to get me to where I am. And I suppose that the question, I'll maybe rephrase it, the question that interestingly triggers me the most now, but I used to love many, many years ago, is the what's next question. And I think I've really tried to dig down into why it triggers me more recently than before, and it's probably because I don't really have a what's next at the moment. And when I was a lot younger, so when I worked in the travel industry, I did a lot of contractual work. So every year or so, I would do a new contract and it would normally take me to a new place. So there was always a what's next, where I was going, what I was doing. And I think when you do an adventure, particularly a big adventure, a lot of people that are involved in that world will always be thinking about what adventure they're going to do next. And I think
Mm.
for me, it wasn't so much the adventure side of things that I was drawn to, it's the travel that's my real passion. So there'll always be a what's next or where's next destination, but I didn't necessarily have a what's next in terms of a huge, big adventure. Yeah.
I wondered as well when I heard when you first started talking about that. I wondered if there was also something about focusing on what's next is maybe losing something or losing some recognition of what you've already achieved.
Yeah, possibly that as
Like
well.
that's behind you now.
Also,
What's the next challenge? Almost like
yeah.
your only motive is the next hill to climb, the next thing to conquer.
Exactly. And I think that also got me really thinking about why that question triggered me. And I think it was because I was actually really enjoying being and really enjoying the moment that I was in and really enjoying the challenges and the journey that had developed after the road, particularly, the fact that I had decided to become a speaker and I was embarking on this whole, and for me, it was a whole new journey because I'd never been a speaker before. And that was challenge enough. But I suppose in terms of big adventures, it's not really that much of a challenge once you've rode the Pacific. But yeah, and I think I've made peace with that question now. And I'm actually really happy with where I am. And I think that's quite a beautiful thing to be able to say. So I own it now.
So we've dropped a couple of hints there, so we better let the boys and girls at home know what what is you. So you've done something that very few people have done in the world, I guess. Relatively very few people have done, which is you were part of a team that rowed across the Pacific.
That's right. Yeah. So I was part of a team of 6 women, and we set 2 world records rowing across the Pacific in a very small 29-foot pink ocean rowing boat that was called Doris, if anyone wants to know. Yeah.
And since then, as you say, you've used that to help you make a change in career direction, I suppose. So talking to different types of audiences, a lot of corporate audiences, I guess, about, and I guess they want to hear about the same sorts of things about resilience and how you did it and teamwork and leadership and all that sort of nice stuff. And I guess for you, there were different lessons that came out of that experience. Like, I'm never doing that again. Um,
Yeah, no, I mean, it was an absolutely incredible experience and journey, and that I was never planning to have a change in career after it. It was just that the experience was so moving in many ways, and I learned so many insights, or many insights were reinforced for me out there that were completely transferable to being back on land. And what I found was that they were really useful insights that I could share with people that would help them, I suppose, gain a different perspective on their situation. And things like you mentioned, because it was very closely linked with teamwork, because we were this team of 6 women, there was actually 4 of us on the boat at any one time. So just to explain, we rowed from San Francisco in the US to Cairns in Australia, and it was a 3-stage row. So we stopped off in Hawaii and Samoa, which gave us an opportunity to restock the boats if we needed to, and also to swap in one of the team members. So 3 of us rode the full 9-month journey, and the other 3 girls rotated the 4th seat on the boat, like a relay team. And yeah, so many insights about working together in a confined space, that conflict management, conflict resolution, how to bring out the best in people, how to bring out the worst, how to know what brings out the worst in each other, because we actually didn't know each other as a team before this expedition. We came together specifically for the project. So even in the preparation stage, getting to the start line, there were so many skills and insights that were brought up for us in terms of teamwork. And then I think for me, possibly the most important attributes to getting through what ended up being a 9-month odyssey. So the journey ended up taking us 9 months out there on that ocean, was positive mindset. And as you say, the resilience to keep on going throughout the monotony and the challenges and frustrations that we experienced out there.
So there are a couple of things I wanted to get into some detail with you today. One of which was what you said to me previously about the speaking and the connecting the audiences, and what you love about that, and how that's been quite difficult during the lockdown, and having to deliver those sessions remotely. And the other thing is I see a parallel between perhaps some of what you experienced on the boat with what people have gone through over the last few months in lockdown, working from home and so on. First of which is the isolation, and second of which is being in a confined space with a small number of people, um, and kind of getting used to those interactions, because a lot of people are working from home, normally spend really the minority of their waking hours at home with their family or loved ones, and now suddenly put together in this small space, I guess, to some extent, like you were on the boat. So the first thing I'm really interested in getting into the detail of is the I'm imagining, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm imagining there were times when, if you could have gotten off the boat, you would have done that. You were thinking, I've had enough of this. Did that, is that a correct assumption?
Mm, in one way, it was more actually the rowing. So we rowed in 2-hour shifts, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 24 hours a day. So it was that same monotonous movement of rocking forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards. And for me, it was, I got to the point where I just didn't want to do that movement anymore. And I just wanted to be able to move my body in a different way. And that's what I wanted to stop. But we were quite lucky in the second and the third leg of the journey, when the weather got slightly better, we could actually get off the boat and get into the ocean on occasion with the weather permitted and there were no sharks around. Um, and that was a wonderful opportunity to just move your body in a different way. In terms of getting off the boat, there was more, we had to learn how to escape the confined space that we were in a different way. And I suppose the only way that we could do that was to mentally escape. So to go somewhere in your mind and to do it in that way, because physically we were literally trapped on that boat. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, which yeah, is very different to lockdown, because I think it can be very frustrating in a small space with people that you're spending 24/7 with. And at least in normal lockdown, you can actually go out of the house, you can go for a walk around the block, you can clear your head, you can get a little bit of space if you need to, even go into the bathroom, close the door, you get a little bit of privacy. Out there on the ocean, there was none of that. I mean, our toilet was a very simple bucket and chuck it system. So really there was no escape. And so I would say preparation was the most important aspect for our expedition. In terms of personality profiling, we worked very closely with a sports psychologist called Keith Goddard. He was amazing. We had to really learn how we would each react in different situations and have an understanding that we would all react very differently. So there was a lot of giving each other constructive feedback, figuring out what our hot buttons were. So, hot buttons is what brings out the worst in people, whether it's something like being hungry or people that chew very loudly. That was one of Laura's. One of mine is being cold and wet, which is not ideal when you're about to row the Pacific, especially in the first leg when it was pretty cold. But it could also be things a little bit deeper, like when you're being patronized. And I suppose it was having that understanding that when someone's patronizing you, it's actually a tone of voice that they're using. And because we would share these experiences and these hot buttons with one another, we could actually stop each other in the middle of a sentence and say, listen, I feel like the tone of voice you're using is a patronizing one. Would you mind just sort of rephrasing what you're saying? Or it would give that person an opportunity to really be self-aware on how they were expressing something. So it was an incredibly learning experience as well.
It's interesting that you mentioned the word privacy, because that sounds like a very exposing experience. And in that interaction that you're describing there, I, I guess lots of people are reading advice online about dealing with conflict, and reading about exactly the sort of things that you're talking about, voicing their emotions and so on, which is all great. The problem I find is realizing that you are having a reaction in the first place,
Yeah.
rather than what I think what we're used to doing is just thinking of, just not even being aware of how we feel. It just feels like a filter's been pulled down over the world, and that is reality. It isn't that the other, I'm not feeling, or irritated or patronized or whatever by your tone of voice. It's you are being patronizing, and our tendency to project that outward. So, how did you get into the habit of catching yourself early enough in that reaction in order to be able to intervene? Because intervening is the easy part, really, once you realize that's what's going on. How did you learn to do that?
Yeah, you're right. And that's a great question. And I think you touched upon the answer there really, which is habit. It was something that we had to start getting used to doing very early on in our coming together as a team. So after any type of experience or event that we did together as a team, getting to the start line. So whether it was a training session, a strength and conditioning training session, whether it was a fundraising event, whether we were doing something that was involved in looking for sponsorship, whatever the event was that we were doing together as a team, afterwards we would sit down with one another and we would give each other this feedback. And so we started getting very used to giving the feedback and also to receiving the feedback. And I think that took a little bit of because no one likes receiving negative feedback, do they? But I think the more you start hearing it, the more you stop taking it so personally, and you can actually use it to become more self-aware and to develop as a person within a team, particularly as a team member or as a leader. But I think for me, I've always done quite a lot of work with myself and personal development. I've done a couple of Vipassana retreats, which are these 10-day silent meditation retreats, which is very much sitting with your sensations and recognizing what's coming up and where you can feel those sensations in the body and what they're connected to and what's triggering those sensations. But it's constant work in progress to catch yourself reacting before you actually react. And yeah, I find that it's daily work doing that, but fascinating at the same time.
In that sort of closed group, do you think it's also about not only being aware of your own reaction, but seeing a certain look on somebody's face, seeing a certain look in their eyes, hearing a slight, very imperceptible shift in their tone of voice, and being able to say to them, "You're about to kick off about something," and giving them
Yeah,
some sort of early warning? Because I think often we're displaying the signs of our internal state through our skin long before we're consciously aware of it. So is that important as well?
yeah, definitely. And I think the more you get to know and understand people, the more you can pick up on those subtle cues. And I think for us as a team, we spent so much time together preparing for the expedition. And then, I mean, once we were out there, it's 24 hours, 12 hours a day with one pair. So we would row in pairs, and we would rotate those rowing pairs every 5 to 7 days, so that we got that change in team dynamic. And I think because we'd done so much in-depth personality profiling, um, within the team, we did have an understanding of how someone would react. But I always joke, we were very, very different, all of us, different backgrounds, skill sets, personality types. And so we really did have to learn about one another. And myself and Laura were quite a lot more extroverted than Emma, for example. And I always joke that Emma, we never really had any idea what she was thinking or what was going on in her mind. So I got really good at decoding those facial expressions, and she would just pull faces. And if I didn't know what that face meant, it would just be a case of I'd literally stop her and say, "Oh, this is a new face. I've never seen this face before, Emma. Tell me what's going on in your mind right now, so that when I see this face again, at least I know what it means." And I think it was having this very open and honest dialogue with one another. There was 100% transparency within that team. And I think that was a big part of the success. And also constant checking in with one another. So if someone possibly wasn't tuned in enough to read that subtle facial expression, or notice, a way someone moved before they were going to react in a particular way, we were actually just asking one another, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Mentally, physically, emotionally. There was that constant checking in. And I think that helped.
It sounds like there's something there about intention and trust in that if you understand the intention behind the checking in, the feedback, and so on, you can at least appreciate the other person is doing it for some purpose, for some purpose that maybe to serve the team as a collective rather than you as an individual, but you can at least understand the purpose behind what they're doing.
Yeah,
How did you share those intentions? How did you keep in mind that you're all doing this to kind of help, I suppose, at the end of the day, to survive as well?
Yeah, and I think you touched on a really important point there, is that there was so much trust and respect within our team. I mean, it built and it developed 100% during the process. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, our lives depended on one another out there on that ocean. And that we wanted to support one another. We knew that the expedition would not be successful. Well, for us, in our minds, our expedition would not have been successful if we'd made it to Cairns and we'd completed our goal, but actually were not still united as a team. So before we headed out on the ocean, we shared our hopes and our fears with one another. So we had this deep understanding of what our hopes were, and it really was that we remained united as a team. So yeah, I think the beautiful thing about being out there was that we were always in slightly different levels and stages of mental positivity. So if someone was feeling more down than the other team members could lift them up and support them in some way. And I think that was a beautiful way with how we dealt it. But really, when it comes down to it, you've got to be able to put yourself in the most positive mental state that you can, really, before you can then be able to support anyone else that's around you. So we each needed to have our own techniques and our ways to deal with the challenges out there. So we called them performance enhancing strategies, PES. And we would each, before we got out into the ocean, we would run through what those performance enhancing strategies were for each of us. So if we used music, for example, that was a really powerful one for me. And we would each write down what songs we knew would, for example, give us extra energy when we needed it and help us to power up. Or if we'd had a really adrenaline filled rowing shift and we needed to try and calm ourselves down quickly, what piece of music would do that instantly? Or what type of breathing technique could we draw on that would help us calm down? Was there visualizations or mantras that we knew would help us shift our mental states? So it was having a lot of those strategies in place for each of us as well, to know that we could be in a really positive space, and then we could support the teammates that were around us.
I think there's again, that's something that you'll often hear as advice. You just got to get into a positive state. Yeah, yes. How do I do that though? And I think you've touched on something there, which I think is probably the most critical thing of all. Everyone knows something that's going to make them feel good, positive, optimistic, whatever, whether it's music, food, looking at pictures of their kids, whatever it is. The trick, I think, in what you've said is figuring that out before you're in the situation where you need to use it.
Yes.
Because if you're in the situation where your mental state is deteriorating and you're not aware of that until it's gotten so bad that you're seeing the effect on the world around you and the people around you, then it's too late then to think what would cheer me up or what would make me feel positive in this moment. You have to have pre-planned that, and therefore you have to have expected to be in the situation where you need it. Therefore you have to have gone into that situation with a certain amount of realism, not just, oh, it'll be fine, it'll be fine, it'll be great, we'll have a laugh, it'll be, it'll be wonderful, it'll be yeah, we're all great friends, we've had a nice drink together, it's all going to be easy. And not to plan for the worst either, but you've had to be realistic about what are the challenges we're likely to face,
Yeah,
and
100%.
how you're going to mitigate that.
Yeah, and exactly right. We had to put these strategies in place before we got onto the boat, and we also needed to have an array of different strategies that we could draw on if one of them didn't work, for example. So if I knew that I had my salsa Los Campeones de la Salsa song that would always give me that energy, and then out there for some reason I played it and it did nothing, then I needed to have another strategy that I could draw on, and then another strategy that I could draw on. And yeah, so I think that preparation was vital to the success of the expedition. And we also, we prepared for any eventuality. So we ran through every what if scenario we could think about. But I think also while we were out there were the little tricks and tips that we would draw on to help us keep in that positive state of mind. One of them was, every rowing shift, I would always get me and my partner, we would always share a daily highlight. So it could have been anything, but we had to train our minds to look for something positive. And it literally could have been anything, but I think it was just that act of consciously looking for something positive. And we all know that being thankful, or gratitude, is such an important part of helping us improve that positive mindset. And I actually think gratitude is one of the most overlooked tools in helping us with our mental well-being. And I think that just got a really good habit going for us out there, always looking for those daily highlights. And it's something that I even do now, especially during the pandemic, is just making a point to always look for something positive every day, whatever it is. If it's having a really good cup of tea that just tasted amazing, or you maybe have a catch up with a friend that you haven't spoken to for a while and it was a really wonderful conversation, or it could have just even be a day where you wash your hair and you just feel a little bit special because you washed your hair. Whatever that highlight is, you're just making a point to look for it. And then I think another thing that really helped was just understanding that there are certain things you can control and there are certain things that you can't control. And I think that was a really big one for us out there, because we spent quite a lot of time fighting winds and currents that would push us in the wrong direction. I mean, we would row for 24-hour periods and literally get pushed backwards. And just knowing that Mother Nature, there's so much stuff when you're dealing with Mother Nature that you're never going to be able to control. And we just needed to make that distinction and just concentrate on controlling the controllables. And then, like I said, just look for the positives in the other situations as much as we could.
So just to rewind a little bit there, what you were saying about looking for a positive, I think one of the common experiences that I think people have in their sort of daily routine of work, and when people are able to, or were able to, or in the future will be able to go out and work in an office, and often what people do is they come home at night and they complain about what an awful day at work it's been. And I think often what it is a request for, it's a request for something from their partner or the person, their friend that they're telling it to. So they're saying, oh, this went wrong and my boss said this and this was terrible, and oh, this idiot in the office is doing this stupid thing again. And it's a request for something. They want the person they're telling. I mean, otherwise, why are they telling them that, rather than all the other things that have happened in that day, as you said, just pointing out, looking for something, some sort of response from that. So I suppose if you are focusing on the something positive that's happened, and you're making an effort to share those things, you're also influencing the other person through what you're sharing. And it may be something they noticed, and it maybe not be, but you're influencing them just as much as people who come home from their mundane work in the office are influencing other people by complaining about how bad their job is. So I would imagine for a lot of people, it takes, again, a lot of effort to break that routine.
Yeah.
And, but I can
Well,
imagine
we're
it's very powerful.
hardwired, aren't we, to go into the negative first. For some reason, as humans, we're hardwired to always look at the negative first. And yeah, like you say, it's training. You've got to train your mind to fight against what it really wants to talk about for some reason, and try and shift it and create those new neural pathways and try and move it to the positive lane as much as you can. But I think with regards to what you're saying, quite often people they just want to be heard at the end of the
Mm.
day. They're not even necessarily wanting a response quite often. It's a way of venting, isn't it? It's just a way of getting that out, because once you've said it or you've got it out, it loses its power completely. And um that was a beautiful thing about being out there on the ocean, was because we had so much time, we really listened to one another. So whatever was being said was being heard, whether it was a positive story that was being shared or a negative one, because we literally went through our life stories out there. And yeah, just having that opportunity to be heard. And I think, you do have to get it out there. So whether it's speaking it or writing it down, we blogged every day we were out on the ocean. So for 257 days we blogged, and that was a wonderful way to get the frustration and what was happening, in our thoughts sort of down on paper. And for me, I've kept a journal since 1990, a diary. And I think yeah, I mean, you've got to get it out. We're only human, and we're not going to be happy all the time. That's not what I'm saying. It's just trying to make a point to look for the positive rather than the negative first.
It seems that a couple of things in that. Firstly, you've got to have an external system to do that, a time of day when you do that, or a team meeting when you do that, share those positive things. Otherwise, it's an easy thing to never quite get around to. Because the other thing in what you were just saying there about venting, I guess having a safe space within which to do that, whether that's people you trust who aren't going to judge you when you're saying horrible things about your colleagues at work, and people who aren't going to try and fix it for you, but just a safe space to vent. And that safe space could be a blog, a journal, diary, a, an empty room that you go into and talk to yourself, whatever.
Yeah.
But there's something in the act of self-expression. And
Yeah.
then another thing I think then is choosing who you're doing that with, and knowing what reaction you're going to get from that person. So if you've only got somebody to vent to who's always doing, what a lot of partners of both sexes do stereotypically, which is try and solve the problem. Because logically, if you're telling me about a problem, you must be telling me because you want me to solve it. And so I've got a great idea for you, I've got a solution for you, which isn't necessarily what they want. And so being able to vent with a person who you know what their response is going to be, that's going to support you, or actually thinking back to what you said about intention and trust, telling them what you want their response to be, rather
Yeah.
than just assuming that because you're venting that they will know what to do with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the most dangerous place for these thoughts and emotions to be is inside, isn't it? You want to be able to release them some way. We had a rule on the boat where you could, if you were in a very dark space, we would let you be for 24 hours. So you could do whatever you need to do for 24 hours. You could, I don't know, hit the boat, be frustrated, be angry. But after 24 hours, you had to share what was going on with you. Because I think for us, that was the most dangerous, was when something was going on for someone and it was all being internalized, and we had no idea what they were thinking, or how we could help in it, and helping could be doing nothing, just sitting there and listening. But just to, you sort of have to have some idea about what someone's going through. Otherwise they start slipping further and further down into that negative spiral. And that's the last thing we wanted out there on the boat, because yeah, in such a small space and an enclosed environment, I mean, the energy just radiated so unbelievably. If someone was in a bad or a negative mental state, you could feel it. You could really feel it. And then it has that ripple effect. Whatever state you're in has a ripple effect. And yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, the whole team dynamics and communication and understanding one another was taken to a whole new level out there, for sure. But a lot of insights that have been very useful for lockdown. Even when I spent a couple of months with my parents, and just doing that highlight every day with them was a great way to just keep our spirits up a little bit. And another thing that I love trying to concentrate on is, I call it celebrating small successes, which I suppose is similar to finding a highlight, but it's more, especially during lockdown, there's so much pressure to be busy and productive, and sometimes I think it's okay to just be, and just let yourself succumb to whatever you want to do that day. And so I've just, instead of giving yourself a hard time, which is something else we're hardwired to do as human beings for some reason, I've just really tried to look for those little COVID successes, and just celebrate little successes every day, rather than thinking about the big, overwhelming negativity that's been surrounding us. And yeah, we had a saying out there, which is where we took everything stroke by stroke. And, when things did become overwhelming, we would just break things down into much smaller, manageable size chunks, really. And for me, it was every 2-hour shift. I just knew that I had to get through the next 2-hour shift, and then I could have a rest shift. So it was just making things seem a lot more manageable.
I just have one last question about the rowing, which is, if you were to compare yourself before you embarked on that journey, and the journey wasn't just the rowing, but the whole, from the moment you decided you were going to do that, if you were to compare yourself at the beginning of that journey to now, how would you say that experience has changed you?
It's an interesting one, that I mean, obviously we're self-aware enough to understand how we change, and what elements we take from certain experiences that will make us become slightly different in the future. But what I love about the row is that I actually feel like it was almost everything that I did before I stepped onto that boat. So my life's experiences that I could draw on before the row. So I was involved in the travel industry. For me, travel was one of the best educations I could ever have. And I believe that my career in my adventures had, and my passion for travel, is actually something that transformed me completely. As I mentioned, I've done a couple of these Vipassana mindful retreats. I think those had so many elements to them that really helped me deal with being out there on that ocean, and the understanding of the law of nature, that everything would change, and just to try and keep myself as present as and as in the moment as I could out there. And I honestly think that all of those experiences prepared me for how I dealt with that journey. And then I think out there, I think just the way that I am and my personality, whether it's nature or nurture, I'm not too sure. I've always been someone that's looked for the positive. My father was an incredible role model on that side of things as well. He lost his leg to cancer when I was very young, and I always remember him making jokes and just being very positive about an incredibly, I mean, I can't even imagine, unbelievably challenging situation that he found himself in. And he always instilled that in me, I think, from a very early age. And I think that whole team dynamic, I really wanted my main life's mantra has always been to enjoy the journey. And I never believe that it's where we end up. Obviously we need goals and we need focus to know in which direction we're heading. But I think it's okay if you go off your path and you do some detours. And I think it's definitely the journey where we we learn the most, and that's where life is. It's in the journey. So on that row as well, I didn't want to concentrate so much on getting to Cairns. I knew that it was such a unique experience out there that I wanted to make sure that we took those moments to stop it and to embrace it, not to stop it, to stop and embrace some of those incredible moments out there. And so that's what I tried to do, to enjoy the journey as much as possible. But I think 9 months on the Pacific Ocean in a tiny boat is gonna change you whether you like it or not. And I think for me, it's given me this amazing benchmark for a start. And now if I ever think I can't do something, I'm like, "Come on, Natalia, you've rowed across the Pacific, you can do this." So that's an incredible thing. It's this benchmark, and I think also this really deep understanding of how incredible we are as human beings, how adaptable we are, how resilient we are, and that we all have this inner strength. It's just the case of knowing how to access it. I truly believe that we are remarkable. Every single one of us is capable of something incredible if we put our minds to it and we have the right support network around us. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you.